In the Skin of a Lion is a finely wrought novel with a beautiful love story, but it's the backdrop of the novel that does the most interesting work. In the Skin of a Lion tells a story of an industrializing Toronto and attempts to rewrite the official history of Toronto's infrastructure and those who built it, by taking into account the voices and stories that have been excluded from the historical record. Let's talk about In the Skin of the Lion by Ondaatje. Ondaatje entered the archive in order to do research on historical figures like Ambrose Small, who was a Canadian theatre tycoon who went missing in 1919 and was never seen again. And he also went in to study the infrastructure of Toronto around that time in the 20s and 30s. He did end up using the sources that he found in the archive, but his research question for In the Skin of the Lion changed while he was sifting through the material. Ondaatje became interested in what he wasn't able to find in the archive, the pieces of history that had been undocumented or excluded or erased. He found that there were countless voices that weren't accounted for, there were these gaps in the historical record, that there were entire narratives, people who helped to build the infrastructure of Toronto that he was looking at, whose stories were not included at all. So when, in the Skin of the Lion, he puts the archive's content to use, it's really to showcase the absences in the archive. His use of what he found acts to illustrate the exclusionary nature of the archive, that it is a collection of pieces that were selected for a reason, and that there were also pieces that were selected not to be included. There are over 4,000 photographs from various angles of the bridge in its time-lapse evolution. The piers sink into bedrock 50 feet below the surface, through clay and shale and quicksand. 45,000 cubic yards of earth are excavated. The network of scaffolding stretches up. The articles and illustrations he found in the Riverdale Library depicted every detail about the soil, the wood, the weight of concrete, everything but information on those who actually built the bridge. As such, In the Skin of a Lion is populated with marginalized characters who work to fill in the gaps in the historical record. Characters include immigrant workers who helped to actually construct the viaduct, or low-class laborers who built the water treatment facility, and, of course, the characters in the text who were real people, who are actual historical figures, are ones that are in positions of power and are able to exert their force not only over the workforce, the immigrant low-class workforce, but that power also secures them a spot in history that Ondaatje then kind of borrows. So one such character is Commissioner Roland Harris, who oversaw the construction of the Prince Edward Viaduct and then also the R.C. Harris water treatment plant. The inclusion of these historical characters in the novel challenges kind of why we think of history the way that we do, and why we allow certain people to live on whereas other people are erased. So Ondaatje's research ended up being influenced by a lot of the archival photographs of the viaduct being built, and so he makes use of those images in the novel to challenge the official history. Ondaatje draws a lot from the photographs of Arthur Goss, who was Toronto's first official photographer, and when he talks about Goss's photography, Ondaatje seems to be suggesting that while there is use in these archival documents, they also can't be trusted entirely. It shows how they are constructed and posed. In the tunnel under Lake Ontario, two men shake hands on an incline of mud. Beside them a pickaxe and a lamp, their dirt-streaked faces pivoting to look towards the camera. For a moment, while the film receives the image, everything is still, the other tunnel workers silent. Then Arthur Goss, the city photographer, packs up his tripod and glass plates, unhooks the cord of lights that creates a vista of open tunnel behind the two men, walks with his equipment the 50 yards to the ladder, and climbs out into sunlight. This passage reveals the ways in which official photography and official history can be set up and constructed. The two men in the photograph are posed, the other workers are silent, they're not working, they're standing aside and watching. Artificial light is brought down into the tunnel so the photograph can be taken. It isn't reality that's being captured, but a constructed vision of reality. It's an idea. Later, Ondaatje compares Goss's photographs to those of Lewis Hine, whose photographs were not staged and instead depicted the authentic living conditions and working conditions of the marginalized and lower classes in America. There were no photographers like Lewis Hine, who in the United States was photographing child labor everywhere, trapper boys in coal mines, 7-year-old doffer girls in New England mills, to locate the evils and find the hidden purity. Official histories and news stories were always soft as rhetoric, like that of a politician making a speech after a bridge is built, a man who does not even cut the grass on his own lawn. Hine's photographs betray official history and put together another family. The man with the pneumatic drill on the Empire State Building in the fog of stone dust, a tenement couple, breaker boys in the mines. His photographs are rooms one can step into, cavernous buildings where a man turns the wrench the size of his body, or caves of iron where the white faces give the young children working there the terrible look of ghosts. But Patrick would never see the great photographs of Hine. Official histories, news stories surround us daily, but the events of art reach us too late, travel languorously like messages in a bottle. Only the best art can order the chaotic tumble of events. Only the best can realign chaos to suggest both the chaos and the order it will become. But not only are the resources that Ondaatje draws from challenging, but also the form of the novel is. Ondaatje, who's a poet as well as a novelist, is not concerned with a linear narrative or linear text. Instead, there are frequent gaps in the novel between sections and between ideas, which I believe mimic the gaps that exist in the historical record. One section ends without warning, and then another one begins. And not only does this formal arrangement of the narrative mimic the gaps in the historical record and the absences between pieces of information, but it also mirrors the experience of working in the archive, where things aren't in line and don't always make sense, and you need to sift through different pieces, small sections, before you can find or make meaning. That's the case in reading this novel. It isn't simple and linear, like it takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes thought, but it is so beautiful as it comes together. As Ondaatje writes, the first sentence of every novel should be, "Trust me, this will take time, but there is order here, very faint, very human."